Cairo, Seattle.
It's time to get schooled with the professor, John Clayton.
Welcome to Schooled with a Professor, and today's topic is going to be concussions in the National Football League. And we'll be joined by Jeff Miller, the Executive Vice President of Health and Safety, because it's a fascinating subject. It's a controversial subject. You know, in a lot of ways, I think that everybody has jumped to conclusions that sometimes, may be rushed. And I say that in the sense that the science of concussions, particularly in all sports, is still in the beginning stages. You can see that a lot of the top experts in the country are still trying to figure it out, because what you're talking about is head trauma, and what everybody's trying to do is be able to try to get the science, all the things that are available that they can try to judge things and help. First, you have to diagnose, and then second, you have to make conclusions on what that information is. And so it's still in that very beginning stages. And with all the research that's going to be invested in over the next couple of years, I think it's pretty good. I know the National Football League has taken a lot of criticism for maybe thinking that they were ignoring a lot of the things that were going on. I call it, not having a lot of knowledge to fully understand it, because understanding that, when a lot of that criticism was there, particularly, a movie Concussion was out there, that, everybody was just, hey, the phrase was, well, the player just got dinged. And it was almost like a brave type of thing that you would fight through that. And of course, if you didn't fight through it, the coaches, the teammates, and all that stuff saying, hey, what's your problem? Players were fearful of admitting that they didn't feel right after plays, worried that maybe they would lose their job or lose a chance to get back on the field. It was just such a time that I think everybody just didn't know. Even now, a lot of the people still don't know, but the education is starting to get to the point now where at some point, maybe 3 to 5 to 7 years ahead, more is going to be known to make it a little bit easier. In the last month or so, I started doing sidelines for ESPN radio, and I was fascinated watching how that concussion protocol goes and able to see how it goes. And even though, a lot of the conclusions are still being studied, you can see it's moving in a positive direction. Very simply. It's not just that one thing where, it's like, how many fingers do you have up? And, you can count them. Okay, then you're fine. A little bit more detail. And you can see that the technology is getting more involved and will get more involved. And that's going to be great for the player safety. It's going to be great for the game. And it's going to be great for all sports. You notice the percentage of players in soccer are just as damaged, I guess you could say, as players in the National Football League, because what happens is, a falling player who hits his head on the ground, may suffer something worse than a player that gets a helmet to the helmet in the head. That's just one of those realities, and it's just something that is a very scary thing. But watching from the sidelines, what you can notice is that there's a procedure, and the procedure is, independent doctors there with another trainer and doctor, and they're all looking at the player and trying to answer, get 5 or 6 questions asked. And then usually by the third question, they get an idea of the way the questions are being answered, whether there's a chance of a concussion or not. One of the things that's immediately done after that questioning is to, you check to see what the video showed as far as that hit. And that can be isolated, and you can see where the hit was made. You put that together with the information you get from the interview, the 6 questions, and then you make a judgment. Do you take the helmet away? Which in many cases you do. You take the player into the locker room and you do more extensive tests. And that seems to be the right way to do it. And of course, being all of this is so new in the last couple of years, everybody's trying to get the right procedures and follow the right procedures to do this. For example, you can see a player that may be getting checked out for another injury, but then all of a sudden a hit's noticed by somebody in the press box, the observer up there. They call down and say, hey, you better check him for concussions. And all of a sudden you find that out. Officials now have the ability, if they think a player looks a little bit woozy, to be able to stop play, have the guy go to the sidelines for a play or two, and just to make sure. Player safety is so involved in this, and the better it is for player safety. And I know it seems like it's an inconvenience and it's a problem. And I know that fans might be turned off by the worry of the concussions, worried that if they would have their kids involved in football, that's going to be something, and it's a valid thing to worry about. But also, the more that this science and the more the procedures are going to to be done, the better I think it's going to allay a lot of the fears of what's going on in this industry for that. Because, you can see the long-term damage, the CTE, and how it affects players and how it affects lives, cause players to, not live a long life. Very difficult thing to be able to, do. But I think the National Football League, and I think other sports are starting to go into it. And what's kind of nice, it comes at a time where the computer technology with the chips can help. They can judge now in the next several years how hard the hit was made and how much potential damage is going to be. The one thing that's not going to happen, and I think people, fans, and everybody has to realize this, you're not going to be able to get into the head to fully understand what the impact is. Because what are concussions? They're head traumas, and there can be serious head traumas. I mean, you can see that. But in the end, you want to advance it so that a player is going to be as safe as possible. Hey, football's a contact sport. That's never going to change. It's going to be big body hitting against big body, and where that hit's going to be is going to have potential damage. That's just the reality. I mean, you have players 340 pounds hitting players 250 pounds. Those things happen. But now I think you can see as time's going on, players are more adjusted, and they are adjusting their launch points. They're not necessarily always going for the head. They're trying to pin it down between the shoulders and above the knees to make sure that less damage is done to the player. And I think that's progress. But still, it takes time. This is not something that you can just click your fingers and say, okay, this is something that can be fixed. I mean, players train their entire lives on how they play, and it takes them years to be able to adjust what's instinctive and be able to try to make the correct hits and try to put it in the right area. And you can see that over time that's becoming less. I thought the most important stat that came out of the preseason, and we'll talk to Jeff Miller about that, is that the helmet-to-helmet hits in the preseason decreased from last year to this year, but there's a spike in shoulder helmets hits. Well, what that says, shoulder to the helmet, is that, okay, the launch, you can see that the players are trying to not use their heads as much now. They're trying to use their bodies and all that. And that's a positive thing. So, concussions, the topic of Schooled with a Professor. And we'll have a chance to talk to Jeff Miller, the Executive Vice President of Safety and Health for the National Football League. He's coming up next. This is Schooled with a Professor. Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. You looking forward to London?
I'm going to Berlin tomorrow, or tonight, actually.
Berlin?
Berlin. It's in Germany.
I know that. Yeah. Wow.
Oh, you do? Okay, good. I was teaching my kids that. It's in Germany. Both.
I don't know. In college, for whatever stupid reason, I took German. I have no idea why.
You did?
Yeah, I don't know why. Why German? It's like, I have no idea, but you take it, and it's like, well, I got, I guess, 3 credits or whatever, so I guess that was good. I think it was because I watched a lot of Army movies.
Any expressions you can share with me before I go over there?
Ich kann nicht meine Gummischuhe nicht finden.
What does that mean?
I can't find my rubbers.
I'm totally leaving this in the podcast, by the way.
That, by the way, that would be the Gummischuhe would be the, you put them around your shoes with the rain.
Sure.
I think that's about the only thing I can remember. Ich kann nicht meine Gummischuhe nicht finden.
It's pretty good. I mean, I don't know how many years you took, but that sounds like a pretty good expression to settle on.
Okay, are you ready to go?
Sorry. I'm ready if you're ready.
Yeah, I am ready. We are joined by the Executive Vice President of Health and Safety at National Football League, Jeff Miller, and the topic obviously is going to be concussions. And one of the things, Jeff, that I know that every quarter of the year I watch Charlie Rose. I mean, I should watch it more than a quarter of the year. And they have some of the top concussion experts in the country that come in. And it's not just football. They just talk about concussions in general. And even as of now, they still say that everything is in the beginning stages of trying to figure out concussions, how to judge them, how to do that. It's kind of an evolving science. It's almost in the beginning stages, it seems.
Well, John, first, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the time. And as a matter of fact, tonight I'm headed off to Berlin, where every 4 years the leading sports concussion practitioners, clinicians, researchers get together to talk about the state of concussion science and release what they call a white paper, which sort of states where we are in the science. And so I'm going along with some of the members of the NFL's Head, Neck, and Spine Committee and Dr. John York, the owner of the 49ers, to learn more about what the state of the science is and where areas of potential research investment can be made to advance the science, which is our orientation to see if we can move the science along. But the mention that you made around, hey, there's a lot to learn as it relates to neurological injuries, concussions, et cetera, is something that we hear echoed regularly. And it's because of that you need to be cautious around the injury. And we spend a lot of time trying to improve the ways in which we identify the injury, advance treatment around it, and to the extent possible, join with others and collaborate on investment in basic science research so that a couple of years from now, more will be known about the injury than there are today.
Can you, when you started doing the health and safety, can you take us from what was being done concussion-wise then, both in research and on the field, compared to what's going on now?
Sure. There have been significant advances made really on a yearly basis. We work very closely on an NFL field with the Players Association around ways to improve the protocols to identify the injury and treat the player. We know, for example, that over the last couple of years, we've added unaffiliated doctors on the sidelines, one on each sideline, somebody who the league pays that the clubs don't reimburse for their participation. And this person is a neurotrauma expert. That could be a brain surgeon. It could be an emergency doc who has significant experience in identifying injuries. And we put them alongside the team physicians to help with the diagnosis of the injury. So they're there every time a player is screened for a concussion. We added, likewise, athletic trainers up in the skybox. These are certified athletic trainers who have an expertise in sports medicine and identifying injuries. And their responsibility is simply to watch the field. They have the inputs from the video feeds of the network that's televising the game available to them in their booth, and they can clip and send down to the team physicians on the sideline the injuries as they occur. And that could be for head injuries or it could be for any other sort of injury. And then those doctors can look at the videos on the sideline. We set up video boards for them so they can see when there's a player that may need to be evaluated and get an appreciation for what they call the mechanism of the injury is. So if a player comes out as an example and says, look, I've got a stinger, and they look at the video and they see that, he may in fact have some nerve-related issues, but he also got hit in the head. They'll know to go through the concussion diagnosis on the sideline. So all of these added elements, the unaffiliated doctors, the athletic trainers in the skybox, the video boards, and the review system are relatively new additions over the last 2, 3, and 4 years, and we've seen as a result the number of players screened for concussions double over the past couple of years. And that doesn't mean that they're all diagnosed for a concussion, but it does mean that the participants from a medical perspective with the game are in a heightened sense of alert and awareness to see if we can identify players who need to be reviewed and then potentially treated should they have the injury.
In the last month or so, I started doing sidelines for ESPN Radio, and so I've actually now, and it was a great education because Carson Palmer in the Arizona Ram game suffered a concussion. Mm-hmm. I was down there, a few feet away from him kind of watching, and obviously I'm never allowed to say the words are used or anything like that, but the visual thing of what you see is there, and you can see that the doctor is asking questions. Next thing you know, there's a consultation, and then within a few minutes they look at the tape to see how the hit was, and within seconds of looking at the tape, helmet removed, go to the locker room, concussion protocol. It seems to be a pretty defined thing that's there as far as the procedure.
I think that's right. In the practice of medicine, having protocols and processes that are standardized and followed is the best practice. And we've learned that from many of our advisors, especially those on our head, neck, and spine committee, who analogize the care for a potentially concussed player on the sideline to, say, a pilot in an airplane who has a checklist. So here are the things that you have to do. This is, if you have a suspicion of a concussion, these are the steps that you must follow. The unaffiliated doctor has to be there. You have to review the video. If you have a suspicion upon a brief review that player has in fact suffered a concussion, you have to remove his helmet, escort him to the locker room, and in conjunction with the unaffiliated doctor, complete a full exam of which could last 10 or 12 minutes, and then the head team doctor and the unaffiliated doctor have an opportunity to confer and make that decision. And the same is true, by the way, on a related note, when a player returns to play, not that game, because anybody who has been diagnosed with a concussion is not allowed to return to play that same day. But they have a series of 5 steps that they have to go through, that player does, during the course of the following week or weeks, plural, before they're allowed to return to play, including sign off by an independent doctor who has no affiliation with the club to make sure that that player is okay to come back to practice and then eventually to play. And it's the implementation of those sorts of protocols that are strictly defined that, while they can be improved, and they are annually as we revisit them, strictly defined, the player then knows, the team doctors then know, and everybody else knows exactly what needs to happen as it relates to this injury.
Obviously, the numbers, because of all the changes, increase, spike, because now more players are being examined. Can you go into the numbers? I know we'll get into a second, the preseason numbers, but just, when you see so many more concussion tests being done, how do you wade through that to kind of see the right direction number-wise it's going?
Yeah, just to put a number on it, last year, 2015, if you look at regular season games, we saw an increase over 2014 in regular season games concussions by about 58%, which after a couple of years of concussions decreasing was an interesting change in the numbers, and we think that's attributable to a few things. One is that, as you mentioned, we saw about twice as many players screened for concussion last year. So if you're screening more, you're probably going to diagnose a few more. I don't have a number to attach to the following. It's more anecdotal, but team doctors and, in fact, coaches reported back to us that players were self-reporting more, that they weren't feeling quite right. And they were more aware, as a result of an education that both us and the Players Association are doing, to be aware of what the signs and symptoms of concussion are, to know enough to either self-report or say, my teammate needs to be taken a look at. We see that as a positive step in terms of culture change. And we also heard from the team doctors over this past year that in record numbers they were seeing players come back to the facility, on Monday, for an example, and say, I was feeling fine, and then I woke up this morning with a headache and such, and would you take a look? Would you give me the exam? And that's not uncommon in the case of concussion, which makes it a pretty difficult injury to diagnose, which is that the symptoms may not in fact show up in the first moment or two, maybe not for an hour or two after, and maybe not until the following day. So I think that there are signs that the culture is changing as it relates to the identification of the injury, and we see that as a very positive thing. Now, overall, we want to see those numbers go down, right? We want to see fewer concussions, and the rules changes as it relates to helmet-to-helmet hits, the enforcement of those rules, coaching practices, the players appreciating this and changing their behavior, all are going to factor into those numbers eventually going down. But if we are identifying more of the injuries and counting more of the injuries, that's a positive thing, because those players are then receiving the treatment that they're going to need, and getting good treatment from the team physician, from the independent doctors and others, means that they're going to return to the game healthier and better sooner than ignoring the signs or symptoms, or somehow those signs or symptoms being missed. So we're not alarmed by those numbers going up this past year. We think that there's plenty of good reasons for it, but over a period of time, of course, we're going to want to see the numbers go down.
And you were able last week at the owners' meeting to present to the owners some numbers from the preseason. And the one thing that you noted that there was less helmet-to-helmet hits in the preseason, but a little bit of a spike of shoulder-to-helmet hits, in the sense that now players are getting it to adjust their launch points when they're trying to make tackles.
Yeah, that's an early takeaway, and it'll be interesting to see whether the hits that have caused concussions follow the pattern that you just laid out. So we saw this preseason, for the first time in preseason numbers, that when we just look at the hits that cause concussion, for the first time, shoulders and arms and elbows hitting the head were the primary cause of a concussion, as opposed to helmet-to-helmet hits. And that does suggest some level of change among the player population in terms of how they hit. Now, it's a small sample, and I think I made this point when we were at the owners' meeting, is that you're just talking about 4 preseason games per team and a limited number of practices. So it's difficult to extrapolate from just that amount of information to a full season. So we'll be tracking that over the course of the regular season, and we usually get an opportunity to digest those numbers and talk about them more publicly around the time of Super Bowl, if the third party that collects all the information can cull it in time. But it's a really interesting trend from our perspective. It also means that we need to take a close look at shoulder injuries or AC joints or those sorts of things to see whether or not player behavior change yields other sorts of injuries. Because if we can identify the sorts of injuries that are being suffered and how that mechanism is being created, then we can talk with the experts about how to intervene and potentially prevent against it. And so we follow these numbers closely, not just because we want to count numbers, which of course is important unto itself, but also because it gives a lot of the really capable people who advise us on these issues some creative ideas about ways to eventually prevent some of the injuries, and that's really what this exercise is about at the end of the day.
And one number I know that you track and is adjusting every year is a timetable for recovery from a concussion. I know each incident is different, each player is different, but is there been an adjustment in the last couple of years as far as how long it takes to recover from a concussion?
Yeah, we've seen it. We track that. And as you point out, it's a medical exercise entirely. And at the end of the day, both the team doctor and an independent doctor appointed by the NFL and by the NFL Players Association have to sign off on a player before he is allowed to return to player practice. So these are pretty objective measures, but we do track it. And in previous years, we've seen that the median number of days between the injury and a player returning has been 6. And a little, maybe a shade more than that. In the past year or so, we've seen that number jump up to 8, which obviously is important for a sport where the games are played on average one day a week. So a player may be on the median, may be sitting out one game, at least one game, and sometimes far more than that, of course, before returning to play. And I think that's probably a result of a conservative nature of the treatment and the diagnosis and how the player is handled. But importantly, it's done in conjunction with independent doctors who have to sign off on that player's return. So we've seen those numbers move a little bit. It's been interesting to watch, and it's something that we continue to track. Most important in all of that is less the number than it is that we know, based on multiple doctors reviewing the player, that he has hit all the marks that are required before he's allowed to return to player practice, and we know that he's recovered from that injury before he's out there playing again. And
then finally, I know that there's going to be a new wave of helmet things that'll be coming up in the next couple of years, varied type of helmets. What can you look forward to as far as concussion preventive type helmet things in the next couple of years?
Sure. We're actually hard at work on this project. We announced a new initiative just a few weeks ago where we're going to be putting the owners committed $100 million to research both into the basic science as well into biomechanical engineering, and that's a fancy way of saying we're going to look for ways to improve protective equipment, helmets specifically. We consulted with a number of biomechanical engineering experts from around the country and said, hey, please take a look at the helmet and let us know whether improvements can be made. And I would say unanimously the feedback we got was sure. If we need to apply some modern techniques, tools, and data, the sorts of things that require significant investment. But once that's done, once we really analyze what's going on the field, once we develop a sensor that can be placed into the helmet to measure not just whether or not a player's been hit, which some sensors can do now, but actually the direction and the magnitude of those hits, then the really capable engineers out there, once presented with a set of data that explains all of that, can say, okay, well, we can figure out ways to fix that. The helmets may look different, the materials may be different, but it will all be driven by data and tools. And so what the league is endeavoring to do is to create all of those tools and all of that data and make them available to the public at large. The league isn't going to build a helmet. We're going to create an environment by which somebody or somebodies are going to create, and maybe the helmet companies themselves are going to advance the technology around it. And the guess is that probably in the next 3 to 5 years, we will start to see substantially improved protective equipment. And the league's investment is going to make that possible for some set of people to do that. And you'll see more announcements from the league in the next few weeks as we figure how we're going to engage with the scientific community at large. We'll put incentives in place, so dollar amounts for people with new and interesting ideas, and connect them to funding so that they can build their businesses and mold their ideas against these challenges that exist around how to improve the protective equipment. We're really excited about this possibility.
Jeff, it's a fascinating science, and it looks like it's going in the right direction. Hey, thanks for joining and explaining this.
Anytime, John. Thanks for this.
Good news, everyone! It's time
to ask the professor.
Ich kann nicht meine Gummischuhe nicht finden. Each week, you get a chance to ask me any question you have relating to the podcast. Just get on Twitter and use the hashtag ClaytonSchooled. This week, I talked player safety in the NFL, and our question comes from Ashley Petty at Ashley Petty, who says and asks, should a hit on a defenseless player, I guess it's a relationship to the Jarvis Landry hit, not involved in the play, so a defenseless player not involved in the play be included for penalty toward ejection? The first thing you have to do, and I know Dean Blandino went over this and even went with video and said that it was a legal play, and it's interesting because the defensive player is the one that got hurt, Aaron Williams, and Jarvis Landry is the one that leveled the hit. And so I guess it's maybe a little bit different when you have an offensive guy doing it as opposed to a defensive guy, because you understand the way the rule goes is that, if you're Jarvis Landry taking the hit, you have to establish both feet on the ground and have a step so it looks like you're now making a move like a runner. And it's like, if before that you get hit, you're defenseless. You have to have the ability to try to go ahead and make that move and show that you're in control of your body, because if you're making the catch until you get the ball secured and take a step or two, you haven't done that. And so in the case like this, it's a little bit different, because when the defensive player is the one that does that, because usually it's the defensive player is the one that's leveling the hit. So it's unusual for that to happen. So in this case, I think you can see it's justified. But as time goes on, if you have more injuries, and of course they're still trying to sort out in Buffalo how bad Aaron Williams is going to be hit, and if he's going to have to miss some time, you've got to see that. But I mean, the big thing is this is more of an offensive player's protection, because, and you've seen it so many times. I mean, I go back in the 70s when Jack Tatum would just take out just about anybody going in the middle of the field. I mean, there was no defense for what he was going to do to that player. I mean, he was just going to flat out level the person. So in the end, you've got to try to, it's the offensive player that needs more of the protection. The defensive players get protection, particularly, on the chop blocks, the chop blocks in the offensive line. They get protection on some of the side hits that they really have no ability to do it. But in the case of a defensive player, there's not as much protection, because the defensive player is the one that's usually the one delivering the blow, not the one receiving the blow. So I know it's a big controversial thing in Buffalo, because everybody in Buffalo thinks that, Jarvis Landry deserves something. And, of course, any kind of personal foul like that puts you within one play of being ejected. But, and what's interesting, and this comes at a time where, Ashley, you realize that ratings are down. And with ratings being down, that there's going to be more of a push to get more offense into the game. I know scoring may be down 1 point a game. Excitement is still there, but I mean, there's not as much buzz for the game. But with ratings being down 12%, one of the things the competition committee is going to do is try to legislate and get more offense back into the game to get the excitement back. And if that's going to be the case, that's not going to help the defensive guys. And so that's where the defensive guys really are kind of defenseless against the competition and committee in the league, because the league wants more offense, and it's understandable. I mean, look at some of the college basketball games. Some of those have kind of been drained because they don't have as much scoring, because now with analytics you can put people in position to really take away some of the plays that normally would be done, and that creates lower scoring. In the NHL, a lot of low scoring there, because I mean, it continues to go down and down and down, and football does not want scoring to go down. It wants scoring to go up, because excitement. In fact, it was funny. I was talking to somebody this week, a general manager, and we're talking about why ratings are down, and somebody brought up the idea of the Red Zone channel. More younger people are not watching the games. They're watching the quick hits going on the Red Zone channel because of fantasy football, and also because you don't have to really pay attention as much. You're not watching one game. And so that, I think, is something to be concerned about if you're going to be the league, because if it's generated not when you're watching the individual game and picking up the ratings. But overall, I mean, offense is going to be the key, and in the case of Jarvis Landry, he was protected in some ways because he's an offensive player. And so, yeah, I mean, you want to try to make sure that everybody has the ability to protect themselves against some kind of a hit. So in Landry's case, right or wrong, the league said he's clean, and right now he at least is not going to be forced to be one play away from an injection in that game. That's it for this week's edition of Schooled. You can follow me on Twitter at ClaytonESPN and send me your NFL questions with hashtag ClaytonSchooled for a chance to get your questions on the air and on the podcast. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed. Hey, Jeff. So the Saints doctor, the concussion guy, comes over to me on the sidelines at the Saints KC game, and so we started chatting a little bit, and then he looks at me and says, "Hey, so do you think Geno Smith can take the Jets to the playoffs?" This is before he got the ACL injury, and I say, "Okay, look at me in the eye. How many fingers do I have up?"
You've got your own concussion test, but that actually might just be a intelligence test.
But probably, yeah. So.